Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. My good friend, Congressman Michael Burgess, back on the show. Mike, good to talk to you. How are you, sir?
I am well. How are you all doing?
Doing great. You represent up there the Dallas area, and great congressman, been there now for a long time, fighting the battle, and the big battle that you specialize in, since you are a medical doctor. You're kind of the point man when it comes to healthcare related issues. And you were talking about an interesting report. I got an email about it. We're going to talk about that this segment. Tell us a little bit about it, about what Obamacare promises to do to us.
Well, this was a report that our committee staff on Energy and Commerce, the Oversight Committee, looked into the President's own Jobs and Competitiveness Council that had put together information for the President. Remember, he was distressed last summer because he wasn't creating the jobs, and why wasn't this happening? And he called business leaders in to give him advice. And one of the things that they really drilled down on was the fact that this darn health care law, number one, nobody knows what it really does. Nobody knows what it really costs, but it looks like it's going to be just a fantastic cost to both businesses, to consumers, to employers and employees alike. So understandably, there's a lot of consternation about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this seems to be kind of typifies this administration. Hey, we have no idea how this stuff works, but we're going to do it anyway. You know, I think for example of Dodd-Frank, the banking bill. When it finally passed, Chris Dodd, the chairman of the banking committee in the Senate, said, "We're not exactly sure what this does, but it is a historic moment." It's like, what are these guys? What are they, mad scientists?
Well, apparently so. And it's, as bad as the health care law is, a lot of that has been discussed, and of course the Supreme Court has heard oral arguments. Dodd-Frank is just as bad, and it's just as bad for the same reasons. That is, a lot of the real stuff of the legislation is done kind of behind closed doors in the rulemaking process of the federal agencies, and this was exactly the trajectory. This stuff's too hard for us to figure out in Congress. Let's write some broad language and give it over to the Department of Health and Human Services or Department of Commerce and let them figure it out. And that is the inherent problem here. Yeah,
absolutely. So with what you got going on, Congressman, what are you telling the American people out there? What should they be doing regarding this?
This is an extremely tough one because we do have the Supreme Court that has ruled but not informed us as to what their thinking is. And it's kind of got everything frozen in time as far as the legislative branch is concerned, because what direction we take next depends upon what they decide. At the same time, you've got the administration just handing out money hand over fist in this health care law so that they get more and more of it implemented to make it harder and harder to walk it back if the Supreme Court were to say, sorry, you guys got to go back to the drawing board with this thing because it's unconstitutional, no severability, therefore the whole law struck down, goodbye Obamacare, and you got to start over. But it is an enormous mess. When we had one of the folks from Health and Human Services in our committee, a man named Steve Larson, who's head of what's called the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight, and I asked him, I said, just in a week or so you've got the Supreme Court hearing oral arguments. What are your contingency plans if they give you bad news? And he gave me the blankest of stares that I've ever received and said, well, we have no such plans. And this is the problem. Their plan is to shove the money out the door, get as much of this spun up as quickly as possible, make it impossible to unravel, and that's their mantra right now.
Yeah, well, you get the strong impression that the Supreme Court is going to shoot this thing down in June. That's the impression I get by just the type of questions they asked and who asked those questions. And the thing that's interesting is that they didn't see how any of it could survive if the parts in particular they were dealing with did not survive.
Yeah, and that of course becomes the central point, and the lack of a severability clause in the law. It really has gummed things up as to what happens next. I will tell you that from the committee standpoint, and what I'm encouraging people on our side to be thinking about is there has got to be some very solid movement right at the start to ensure that some of the insurance reforms that people actually like, that those don't go away, But at the same time, there's going to be a presidential campaign that's being litigated across the country, and that will play a big role in what happens next. So it is of necessity. I'm encouraging people to be somewhat flexible in their thinking about what happens next after the Supreme Court rules. And you know how this stuff goes. A lot of times the Supreme Court is not going to give us a definitive ruling. It will give us a more ambiguous ruling. That is, maybe strike down the individual mandate, but leave some of the other parts in place. So that's going to be the very difficult landscape with which we have to deal. And then the poor businesses, the employers and employees, they're having to make decisions right now about their health care coverage that, again, they don't know what the future holds, so it makes it extremely dicey.
So let's say, what you and I would call the worst case scenario would be that somehow the Supreme Court, decided to go ahead and let it stand tack. What do we do? What does our side do?
Well, let's even stretch it further and say make it the maximum worst case scenario. That happens and the president's reelected.
Yikes.
The bottom line is this thing doesn't work.
Well, after that happens, you and I go to re-education camp, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But this thing doesn't work, and that's what this Jobs and Competitiveness Council outlined to the president. Here you got Southwest Airlines, a big company in our state of Texas, that looked at this thing and says, we're spending $414 million to provide health care. We would have to pay $111 million in fines. What are we going to do? If we don't provide health care, we'd have to pay that much in fines. In other words, they can reduce their health care costs by 75% if they stop offering health insurance.
By just paying the fines. And, of course, their employees are getting quality health insurance under this plan, according to the government, so why should they pay twice?
Well, and this is the big, one of the things that's really, when I say this thing doesn't work, it is a cost part that really has to concern people. When the subsidies in the exchange kick in 2014, that is an enormous drain on the federal treasury, because you are going to have companies that will look at this and say, wow, I can save 75% of my health care bill. Of course I'm going to push my employees into the federal program because that's what it's there for. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence, people may get less insurance coverage than they had before, but at the same time, the cost to the government is going to go through the roof. And the Congressional Budget Office did not take this into account when they did their original figures on what this thing was going to cost. So with that original projection of it's going to cost $1 trillion over 10 years, you really have to triple it to get some sense of what this thing's really going to cost.
Congressman Michael Burgess is his name. Great guest. Been on many times. We're going to get him on again. Doctor in the House. Excellent book. I really enjoyed it so much. Let me ask you, in terms of the fines, can the government agencies unilaterally raise the fines, or are they subject to congressional approval?
What an excellent question, and no one knows the answer to that right now. But I will tell you.
That's one of those things that Pelosi said we won't know until we pass it, right?
Well, I will tell you this. You and I both know they're going up because there's no other way. And President Obama, when he was selling us this thing, he said, if you like what you have, you can keep it. Mm-hmm. What he should really have told us was, you're going to pay a lot more to get a lot less.
Congressman, I got to go. Michael Burgess, we're going to get you back on. Doctor in the House, I say look up that book. I enjoyed it so much and always enjoy having you on. You're a great guest.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. When we come back, much more for you, so stay tuned to The Price of Business.